A, part B, part 2, part 1, part A, part B, part 2. Well, come on down, gather round. Welcome back to the Easy Reapers Coastal Restoration Fish Room of Science. And, oh look, the fish are watching the weather. So, today, you might have noticed, hi Max, Max might have noticed, that I haven't been streaming lately. Very much, very often. And this is for good reason. It's because I'm doing wonderful things like this. I'm being the living spreadsheet using the basic fucking word processor to sit here and try to twerk, well, retail projections. Oh yeah, we're doing it. We're doing it hard. Okay. So I just attempted to film this video and ran out of RAM, and then I attempted to live stream once, and then it wouldn't let me live stream, and I've killed everything and buried the bodies, and seems to have a better signal. Okay. And by that I mean I turned off the Wi-Fi. And buried the bodies. Um. Anyway. So just gonna try to bullshit for a second, see if anybody's gonna join us. Maybe, perhaps. Cool, cool, cool. Cough, cough. Nudge, nudge. Say no more. Notifications don't seem to go out a whole lot. It boggles my mind how the bigger channels can have, like, noticed the problem because I guess like a percentage of their notifications don't go out or whatever. But it's funny how clever that is. Because when it all comes down to it, it should be notifications or no notifications. We generally here get no notifications most of the time. So I just find it rather curious that some of the bigger channels will see, like, oh, they got 100,000 subscribers and only 20,000 subscribers get notified. But anyways, so how are you, Mr. Maximo? I'm all stuffed up and fighting a fucking cold and a headache and just feeling shitty. But anyways, excuse me, Jesus Christ. I didn't cough through the first couple attempts. So, I was going through these supplements here. And as I was typing this, I realized that, you know, it's taken me a long time to figure out exactly what each of these things is best used for. And really, the people at Seachem aren't that much help. the online forums really aren't that much help either. So I wanted to make a video that anybody could search for online and be able to find the answer to their question: which buffer is best buffer? Which mixed marine supplement works best for what type of application? Now, this depends on three major factors that you want to consider. Number one, and the most obvious, is how big your tank is. Number two is how often you do your water changes. Should be almost as obvious. But number three is what kind of crap do you have in your tank? Okay? And by crap, I mean fish and coral. Hopefully you don't actually have like a turd. Would that be like a turdarium? Anyways, I don't know what the point of that would be, but I'm sure you'd find some kind of frat boys that would giggle at it for 5 minutes. Anyways, so enough of this turducken of a video. That's a chicken that a turkey crapped on or something. Anyways, are chicken stuffed with shit? No. So, now that I've ruined the monetization quality of this video, no. We're all grown-ups here. We can laugh at silly jokes about turduckens. Just, try to control your hormones around them. Otherwise, I'll have to banish you. I know turduckens are kind of hard to resist. It's like having a threesome for poultry necrophiliacs. Have I gone too far yet? I think I've gone too far. I'm really trying. So anyways, buffers. Yeah, buffer. Who got the buffer? Oh, I had a buffer. It was called Kent Marine Essential Elements. And it comes in a little purple bottle, and it's got a very deceptive anemone on it. Pay no attention to the anemone. In fact, if there was enough quantitative proof, Kent Marine would be probably fucking sued for that anemone on there. Because that anemone makes you think that Kent Essential Elements can be used with anemones. It cannot. You cannot use Kent Essential Elements with anemones. Don't do it. Don't fucking do it. However, it is very useful for a low-cost, small system that is water changed once a month or less. Just a shit, low-budget, neglected system that you want to add 1 or 2 drops just to kind of balance out the pH a little bit at night. Okay? This kind of system is going to have algae and hopefully caulerpa growing in it. And you don't necessarily need to do it every night, but it's the very minimum you can do to add a little bit of calcium, a little bit of broad spectrum trace elements, and it will grow just a little bit of coralline algae as long as you don't have a very polluted system, as long as you clean your little AquaClear or have a little protein skimmer on there. It's especially beneficial for a very small nano tank that has a protein skimmer, as the protein skimmer can remove a lot of these trace elements. But if you're doing water changes once a week or once every 2 weeks, it's probably not the best solution. It can be used for a fish-only tank that, you wouldn't otherwise be inclined to do weekly water changes on. A weekly water change system is for a small nano tank that somebody wants to keep very nice corals in. And bear in mind that water must be acclimated exactly to the conditions of that nano tank so it doesn't shock the system. And, you know, you'll kill everything by trying to make it better. That's never a good feeling. I was just trying to help and it all died. No, you don't want to do that. You want to make sure you match the salinity and temperature of any incoming new water in a very small system, or any kind of small to medium system, actually. Because, well, you're going to be doing it proportionally, and you don't want to shock it. Now, large systems, you don't generally do those kind of percentile water changes, so it's different. But anyways, that buffer right there shouldn't be considered good enough for any type of polluted system. It's for somebody with a hang on the back filter or a hang on the back protein skimmer that rinses it out, changes it regularly. What you want to use for anything but I'm just talking just a 10-gallon with a clownfish in it. That's what you use your essential elements for, okay? No anemone though, because there's copper and other heavy metals in there, and they're good for fish, but anemones hate them. What I think it does, and I've done probably a decade's worth of experimentation and tried to observe the effects either way. What I think it does specifically is actually kill the stinging cells in the anemone, and keeps it from being able to take food. The stinging cells actually are how the anemone grips the food. They're like the little harpoons, you know. They're actually the equivalent of the gecko feet, and they grab the food and pull it towards the center. So just kill those cells, and the anemone is not going to eat, and it's going to die. So if you'd like to have an anemone in a small system, and you want a buffer, you don't want to do water changes every week, but you want something to keep the pH up. You don't want to use Calquaser, that's too much. You don't understand these other big powdered supplements. You want one thing that's just going to make it simple. And you want to do a water change maybe every 2 weeks, maybe every month. What you're looking for is marine buffer. Okay, and that's that guy that I have up there that I usually keep over by Top Off Bear. And oh, it's a shame that the recording didn't work, because during the recording over by Top Off Bear was Renji, and that was hilarious because, you know, it looked like Renji was kind of holding Top Off Bear. Oh, good times. But, you know, technology hates me, so no Renji. I've been pretty much watching Bleach incessantly while I do this to distract me from how bad I want to continue watching the mangas. I've made it like to 5:45 maybe. I had watched all the little summary videos. Now I'm watching every single manga, and it's glorious. Soul Madness is a wonderful YouTube channel. If you haven't, check it out. But anyways, marine buffer is actually useful in all types of systems. Now, you might notice on this particular list, if you can read it, that my store inventory is not going to include reef buffer. One of the headaches that people have when they go in, they try to look at reef builder and reef calcium, and they see reef buffer in there, and they see marine buffer, reef buffer, and marine buffer, and reef buffer is kind of the same looks like it's the second part to reef builder, and they both kind of sound the same. It's reef buffer and reef builder. Oh, can I get that? And it sounds like that's going to be the calcium, and the other one's going to be the alkalinity. But no, actually, you're supposed to use reef advantage calcium with reef builder, and reef buffer is basically completely fucking useless. I repeat, reef buffer is completely fucking useless. The only people that need to use reef buffer are people with test kits that they use every fucking day or whatever, and they're trying to grow SPS at that peak level, and they want to have that peak pH, but they also want to have a bunch of fish. Okay? Well, that acropora growing up top and a bunch of fish. Marine buffer is to be used in that kind of situation very, very carefully to compensate for an insufficient refugium size. Okay, so what you would normally need at night is a planted aquarium that can maintain the pH that normally your corals will maintain through their photosynthesis. But if you don't have that, then you can have, in addition to your calcwiser, a secondary container slowly dripping reef buffer at night only to keep your pH at 8.3. But if you can stand your pH to be 8.2, then you don't need to fucking bother with all that. That's why I say it's completely useless, because 8.2 is just fine, and in most cases actually grows coral even better than 8.3, as long as you maintain proper alkalinity and not too much alkalinity. So, marine buffer. The reason why marine buffer is both superior and safer is because it can't be overdosed. It's a borate salt, which means, well, allegedly, you know, I haven't done personally the experiment, but if you overdose it, basically it will precipitate and become just like a powder and dissolve. I think it bonds with silicate in the water, but I'm really not sure. Don't quote me on that. But allegedly, it cannot be overdosed, and what it does is it balances out and bonds with other compounds and forms a pH of 8.2. Okay. Now, I simply add that instead of calcwater to my top-off water, and that's how I maintain my pH. In order to maintain additional coral growth, I use 2-part solution, but you can actually maintain just your basic little corals and get coralline algae growth in a small reef tank just by using marine buffer in your top-off water, as long as you're doing water changes once a week, twice a week, once every 2 weeks. I wouldn't go more than that without using one of the products below. Okay, so moving on to that, one of the headaches, like I said earlier, that you have is these products all kind of look alike, and you wind up getting confused as to which one you can buy. Okay, and you're like, I have a reef tank, so you'd never guess that this is the one you can buy if you want to buy one. Okay, but that's it right there. Get that one. If you want to buy 2 of them and you want to do a little better than this, okay, first of all, go ahead and get a little bit of that too. I would use this cyclically after a water change. Build up the borate salts in the system to maintain the pH for a week after the water change. And then I would switch over to these two guys for the remaining 2 weeks until my monthly water change. If I was to use no water changes, I would add these right here to that regiment, and actually probably reef complete as well. And they would be in kind of phases that followed the siphoning of the tank. And I'll explain that more when we get further down the list. But say you've got a system about 50 gallons. You want to grow SPS. You want to have whatever coral you want. And you're doing water changes every 2 weeks like a good boy. But you just want the ultimate in purple coralline algae growth. These are the ones right here. This right here is your calcium. This right here is your alkalinity. This, in addition, or what makes this better actually, I believe it's a little more expensive as far as long-term usage goes than Calquaser, but it's one of the cheaper alternatives, but better because it provides some organic calcium that's ready to dissolve and bond. I don't know how, but it seems to work. It's basically a dry version of the wet reef calcium, which is advertised as an organic calcium and stimulates both coral growth and coralline algae growth. But anyways, so this one here, say your auto top off, you fill it up one time with that and one time with that, or you can run 2 different auto top offs and have each of them dripping. Okay, but that's actually not ideal. What you really want is either put this, pre-mix it and put it in a dosing pump, or for the easy reefers method would just be one day you do that one and one day you do that one, and you just got to keep track of it. I would do maybe even days and odd days, and then at the end of the month skip a day. If it overlaps, you know, if you need to. But if you got a bigger system and you want to go a little more hardcore, here's Calquaser. It provides both of these. Okay, so this is calcium and alkalinity, but to a limited degree, not for coral growth. This is coral growth calcium and alkalinity, and this is high volume coral growth calcium and alkalinity. Now, again, I would still, for the first week after a water change, simply use marine buffer in my top off to build up the borate salts in the system. And because at that point you don't want your alkalinity to spike because you've got nice clean water in there and you're adding supplements to it that haven't been depleted yet. Okay, now in between here and here, and you know, really for a large range of systems depending on use, if you wanted to have a small system that's uh, well set up, like with a dosing pump. There's a lot of different two parts other than CChem you can use. Obviously, CChem is my preference, so I'm just talking about fusion. But there's many other two-part solutions you can look at. But what these are designed to do is your calcium and your alkalinity, plus some trace elements mixed in with each. And this can get expensive, which is why on my system of about 140 gallons, actually no, wait, what are we down to now that I've ended all the quarantines? I haven't even done a count, have I? We got 40, 20, and 55, so 95, 115 gallons in the one system, plus a 10 gallon. But 115 specifically, or call it 100 when it's a little low on water. 100 gallons of water, and I'm using 7 millimeters of this every other day, every 3 days, because I'm trying to be sparing with it right now, and just a couple of grams of that in my top off water, and I have about a gallon of evaporation every day, and you know that's keeping acropora growing just barely. Certainly keeps my montiporas happy, and I'm hoping I don't get to the point where I need too much trace element supplement, because I'm running low on that right there. Which brings me to that. What is that for? Okay. To be quite frank about it, most people, if you're doing water changes every 2 weeks like you're supposed to on your small tanks, if you don't have, I mean, well, just nobody with a small tank should be using that. If you have little consumption as far as coral goes, you should never use that on a small tank. If you go, say, a month without water changes, okay, you might maybe use a little bit of that. I would think Seachem fuel would be better, because that'll feed the corals at the same time. That's the Aqua Vitro fuel made by Seachem, which I'm gonna, speaking of which, I need to go ahead and list that. But anyways, that's probably the best one for a nano tank. But for your bigger tanks, after about 2 weeks from the water change, if there is any kind of coral consumption, you're going to need to add trace elements. Now, what I would do if I wanted to really just balance it out in a high consumption tank, if I'm doing a water change every 2 weeks, I would add a little bit of this after 1 week. Okay. But if I'm doing a water change every month, I would add this after 1 week, this after 10 days, and then 2 weeks, and then 20 days, and then, 3 weeks, or just wait a little more, maybe like 23 days, and then a week, kind of like a week before the water change. Yeah, but you get the idea. You want to add that twice during that month, and add that 3 times during that month that you don't do the water change. Because this is a little more tracy than this. Okay, trace elements, and then even tracier trace elements, basically. So this, if you have corals that are consuming a lot of calcium and alkalinity, they're going to wind up consuming a lot of these too. But they're only going to be consuming a little bit of these. So anyway, now another thing to consider, and this is an old school approach that really, it's so well balanced, it's hard to go wrong with, and corals do seem to kind of adapt to it as far as the levels that they use, or either that or they've just got it so bang on that it works in just almost every scenario. Reef Complete. Okay, what Reef Complete has is calcium and 2 kind of major minor trace elements, magnesium and strontium. Magnesium is really kind of more of a major element. But when your hard corals grow, and even soft corals and anemones grow, they use magnesium and to a lesser degree strontium, and will have very weak skin and skeletons if they don't have enough of that to grow with. So Reef Complete can be used instead of a 2-part solution, and makes a good complementary addition to marine buffer for a smaller system that you don't want to do, you know, like basically you don't want to bother with all the individual tests. You just want something that you can add to it and just see like what grows and how it grows. You're going to dose that basically as directed, or as you can afford to dose it, starting a week after your water change, and then just keep that in your top off, and that'll maintain your major elements, that'll maintain some of your trace elements, and then you're doing your either 2-week or your monthly water change. And if you don't have a lot of consumption, if you're not specifically trying to grow like a big bunch of SPS frags, it's going to work just fine. Now, it doesn't work very well by itself because it doesn't maintain pH. So just make sure that if you're using that, you use it in addition to something like these 2 guys in your top off water, or I think that the most obvious complementary solution right here is Reef Complete and Marine Buffer. Now you also have Reef Calcium and Reef Carbonate, and if you have a very small system, you might consider using those if you have SPS growing past the frag plug and starting to get a little bit big, and you want to add direct calcium carbonate, but you don't want to mix it with the top off water. You just want to be able to add just like a little bitty capful once a week. Liquid calcium, liquid carbonate. That's the same as this powdered calcium, powdered carbonate. Calcium carbonate, calcium on top, carbonate on bottom. This is accounting. This isn't a sales brochure, sorry. It's not in perfect order. So anyways, if anybody has any questions, feel free to start asking them, because I'm getting close to wrapping this one up. If you're on a regiment of Reef Complete and Marine Buffer, Reef Trace can be useful, again, at the 2 and 3 week mark before the monthly water change, or you could use it at the 1 week mark before the 2 week water change. That just, depends on your consumption, depends on how high you want to keep them trace elements. If you got a little baby clownfish in there, he would appreciate you adding those trace elements after a week. But this right here, the Reef Complete, a little bit of Reef Trace, and Marine Buffer in your top off water, that's a good cheap solution right there. Let's see, the retail price is going to be about $13 on there. $13 for the Reef Complete, $16 for a jar of Marine Buffer that'll last a long time in a small tank, and then $16 for the Reef Trace. You keep that in your fridge, and you're just using like a few drops every week. It's pretty concentrated, and you might have to buy that stuff if you're really using it regularly. You might have to buy these 3 times a year. Keep them fresh. Don't be buying more bulk than you need to for a small tank and then letting it sit for years at a time. Buy small till you figure out, well, I'm going to probably use more than this in 6 months. I'm going to use this all up in a few months' time. Then go ahead and buy yourself the half liter or the full liter, 500 kilograms, 600 kilograms, or gram, excuse me. Oh, kilogram. Now that'd be a lot. That's probably how much I need for my store per year. Anyway. So Reef Complete, there's 3 elements in there. Okay. Fusion was kind of made to replace Reef Complete. But, Fusion's more, I've got a bigger tank, I'm trying to avoid water changes. I don't necessarily need all these trace elements, I just want the ones that the corals that are growing really need. Okay. And you can use that in combination with Calquaser on a really big system, or you can use that in combination with Marine Buffer in your top off water on a smaller system. And with proper combination of a good 2-part solution and very light usage and even lighter usage there, as long as you're running a refugium, you don't have any kind of detritus buildup that you're letting go, stirring your sand regularly, your protein skimmer is taking everything out that your sand stirs up. You can go without water changes by using that 2-part solution. You're not going to be able to go those long periods of time without water changes, just adding the calcium, magnesium, and strontium, which that's not what that is, but I just wanted to click on 3 things. But if you're doing water changes every 2 weeks, even every month, This one right here works just fine in combination with this for top off. Um, Chances are, if you're using Calcwiser, you're not going to use this though. If you're using Calcwiser, you're probably going to use this. So let's call this for small systems to avoid water changes for a little while. You go a month without a water change. Okay. And then start adding this after a week, especially if you got baby clownfish. Medium systems to avoid water changes, you're going to need a 2-part and the marine buffer, or this as your 2-part and the marine buffer. But you see, this is newer here, and this is more formulated around the trace elements that corals actually need. So one would imagine that, or one would logically surmise, I suppose, that if you weren't using the 2-part, if you were using this, then you would need more of this. If you're using the 2-part, you would need less of this. Either way, you would still need this, because the 2-part doesn't have the rare trace elements. It only has about half of what this has in there. Only the major consumption ones of these, okay? To the best of my knowledge, they still haven't made a 2-part that is specifically designed around no water changes. So on a large system, no water changes, you need your good 2-part, you need your Calcwiser, or marine buffer in a larger quantity. And then on week, basically you'll just be using these as directed. A no water change system, bear in mind, you're not doing no water changes, okay? You still have to siphon out sand, you still have to siphon out dead spots, you have to siphon out, you have to clean out your filters and remove detritus. You don't just like let that blow back in. Okay, so you're changing out a couple of gallons, all right? That is going to buffer your system just a little bit as far as trace elements goes, okay? And that's why I say, even with a no water change system, you do your little clean out water change, you wait a week, you do that, wait 10 days to do that, 2-week mark, do that again, 20-day mark, do that again, 25-day mark, do that again, and then you're at a month again. And these two guys will help you just maintain nice, even, and that's the point, okay? Like, the whole idea that you need to test individual elements is peddled by people who are trying to sell you the ability to test individual elements. What you really need is stability, okay? If you have too much of a trace element that's not, some untested poisonous fucking level, you're talking predetermined scientists who've been doing this shit for 40 years. This is how much they want you to add, this is how often you should add it, and they know that if there's too much in that system, it's just going to grow algae. That's what happens when you have just a little bit too much of any trace element. You're going to grow algae. And you can make up for that by having plants in a refugium that will absorb whatever excess trace elements. Now, at the same time, that's going to compete for those trace elements in the water, but you're continually adding them. They're continually competing for them. It's okay that they're competing for them because they're still getting added. The corals are getting some, the plants are getting some, everybody's happy. So, no water changes. You do your siphons. You go through this cyclically between the siphons. You're adding this once a day, max once every 3 days. Um, you can, on larger systems, smaller doses get spaced out to where it's like this will go, and then 6 hours later this will go, and then 6 hours later this will go. Thing is, you don't want to add both of these at the same time because they'll actually condense together and precipitate in the system, and then you'll just be building like coral dust in the water, and that's not good. Same thing with these. That's the reason why if you want to add these to your top off water, you add this on one day and you add this on the next day. And that's again for medium systems to save money, okay, and larger systems as well, because your 2-part ain't cutting it, and you got a whole lot of hard coral, you got a whole lot of coralline algae, and you want it to just take over that stuff right there. That is your coralline algae and hard coral growing. And by hard coral, I mean FPF and LPF. I've been doing this for 30 years. We called it hard coral back then. But anyways, so now some other individual things you might consider, like I said earlier, your reef calcium, this liquid stuff, it's not the same as advantage calcium. Advantage calcium is like it's like a calquizer like calcium with reef calcium mixed in. But this organic calcium that comes in the reef calcium it's like a pre-bonded amino acid rich calcium that doesn't actually require carbonate. This carbonate here is to be used with Reef Complete. Reef Complete, calcium, strontium, and magnesium, is the original 2-part with reef carbonate. Okay? But this is ionized calcium, and you want to have reef calcium supplemental so you can get that nice purple coralline algae growth, and so you can stimulate your corals to grow, because they like the amino acids in addition to just the ionized and deionized calcium. So again, this is not a brochure, this is fucking accounting. So if you want to use this with less water changes, okay, this can be used in between more frequent water changes on a smaller system to supplement the magnesium and the strontium. But if you want to go from, say, a 2-week water change to a monthly water change, you want to start adding the carbonate after a week or 2 weeks. Not in equal proportion like a 2-part solution. That carbonate actually gets added at a lesser proportion during that type of regimen. The 2-part solution, on the other hand, gets added in equal proportion. Now, iron. If you've got a lot of caulerpa and clownfish, go ahead and get yourself some iron. Magnesium and strontium, don't add those individually unless you're testing for them and you need them. Okay? Iron, use it very sparingly. Know that it will cause algae growth if your plants can't absorb it all. But your clownfish will definitely appreciate an extra little dose of iron in the tank. If and only if you're not using Kent trace elements. If you're using Kent trace elements, you shouldn't be doing any of this other stuff. maybe marine buffer in your top off water. That's about the only thing that's actually compatible with trace elements, Kent essential elements. Excuse me. For those of you who are just joining us, as I said in the beginning of the video, Kent essential elements are for just a small 10-gallon with like a clownfish or two in it, and some caulerpa, and you just want to grow a little coralline algae on your rocks. You don't want like anything but maybe some soft coral, and you want to do a water change every couple of months, and you just want it to have a little bit of buffering at night. You don't want the water to be too shitty that nothing can survive in there, kind of. It's just your basic half-ass solution. Okay. But all these are very serious, viable solutions, and when used appropriately for their proper application, can basically keep any type of coral, any type of fish that you want. You know, given all the other parameters are in check. And one of those things that you might want to consider if you want to keep anemones or crabs, shrimp, crustaceans of any type, jellyfish, or even clownfish, or any fish that are prone to bacterial infections like a pufferfish, it's good to add iodide in there. Now, to prevent iodide overdosing, again, a planted refugium is best because plants can absorb iodide rather rapidly. Again, potassium, they can absorb that quite rapidly too, and your plants will be very thankful for it. But what potassium does is actually help your corals look very pretty. Now, magnesium and strontium are key to that, but they can be overdosed and are dangerous to overdose. Potassium and iodide. Iodide's a little bit dangerous to overdose, not so much with a significant refugium. Potassium, really hard to overdose, and will cause massive algae blooms before it's, unless you're like sitting there like a 5-year-old just chugging the shit in there. If you're sitting there following the directions and it's not as much, it turns out to be more than your consumption requires, all it's going to do is grow some algae. Okay, start growing algae, cut back on the fucking supplements, do a water change like you're supposed to. Anyways, so that's the stuff that I'm going to be carrying in my store, because that's the stuff that I use that I know works. That's the stuff that I've been using for years. And if you need anything else, you should just be doing a water change. So, anybody got any questions? Feel free to ask them now. If you got a specific type of or size aquarium, and you want me to give you a specific solution, now's the time. I will gladly do so. In song form. No, probably not in song form. So Maximo has asked what he would use for his 15-gallon Max, how often do you want to do water changes on your 15 gallon? How often can you afford to, do you think? You want to do them as little as possible, and or do you want to like sit there and start collecting A-cans and frags and stuff in there? Well, the simplest solution is probably going to be some marine buffer in your top off water. But if you're going to do frags, you're going to want to use a two-part solution on top of that, because you only got a 15 gallon. You know, you're not going to want to sit there and mix up powder mixes. So I would recommend, you know, the Seachem Fusion or Two Little Fishies A and B. Bulk Reef Supply has one. There's a lot of different companies that have them now. Or you want to make sure you find Reef Complete or a competing product that has the calcium, strontium, and magnesium, because all your frags are going to need that stuff. And so when you do your water change, say if you do it once a month, that's going to replenish your trace elements, that's going to replenish your calcium and your alkalinity. But no matter how good all that stuff is, at night when your photosynthesis stops, the pH is going to go down unless you have a buffer. So you can have your marine buffer in your top off water at that point, and then I would recommend adding your two-part, either one day or one the next day at night, because when you add that two-part, it does buffer the pH just a little bit, so you can have the little bit of a pH spike at night to compensate for the dip in pH from the lack of photosynthesis. And that with the marine buffer should actually keep it pretty even overall. But the main thing is, you won't need anything but marine buffer until you have something consuming the elements. Okay, so once you get your tank set up, you know, you add the marine buffer to the top off water straight away. But you don't wait until you see coralline algae starting to grow before you add, say, a little bit of Reef Complete. Okay, and I think if you want to buy just one bottle instead of a two-part solution, go ahead and go with Reef Complete, and you can always buy the bottle of carbonate later and turn it into a two-part. So the Reef Complete is going to add your calcium, strontium, and magnesium. And what that's going to do is help keep that coralline algae that's grown from the fresh salt water growing without extra little trace elements that are going to help the algae bloom. So in the beginning, Reef Complete can be quite useful. And especially when you just have little bitty frags that aren't going to require a lot more trace elements than a monthly water change can provide. It'll provide the calcium and magnesium that they need to just stay strong and begin their growth onto the frag plug. And that'll help. Oh, it's actually better to have them growing a little bit slower at that point as opposed to just taking off and growing. And that extra magnesium and strontium focus will help them grow strong at the base. And that way, being strong at the base, when they get bigger, the overall structure will be stronger. So you start out with Reef Complete. And marine buffer in your top off water. And then once you get corals are growing, switch to Fusion. And then once you reach, you know, like after about a year, maybe a year and a half, when the system is really stable, that's when you start reducing your water changes to like every 2 months. And in a little tiny bitty tank like that, just a little tiny bitty tank like that, if you have significant corals, which you can't, I mean, 15 gallons, I put a lot of fucking coral in 15 gallons. That's when you add the trace elements. The thing is, adding your trace elements too early, they wind up just causing algae problems. Just algae problems, algae problems, algae problems. And you know, I kind of wish I wasn't experimenting so much with this setup that I have here. But you know, new products to me, I wanted to use it. Seachem Fusion. I've been using Reef Complete for fucking 10, 15 years. No idea how long. Wanted to give it a try. But let's just say I had similar results before I started using RODI water. The Fusion has trace elements, man. The Seachem Fusion has trace elements. And unless you're growing a whole lot of caulerpa, I mean a whole lot of coral, or a whole lot of caulerpa, those trace elements are going to grow algae. So there's like a definite tipping point where your system kind of becomes stable enough you know, like through like you figuring out, oh, that's too much food, and then siphoning that bullshit out and getting it back under control, and then the microfauna and everything just finally getting all growing in, and all the coralline algae covering all the rock and glass everywhere it's supposed to be growing. At that point, the trace minerals are starting to get depleted, as opposed to before then, trace minerals were just going into algae and bacteria, and then that would die off, and then it would get re-released, and then it would get reabsorbed. After about a year or so, it starts to get absorbed into little sponges and little tiny critters and little, you know, just little shit that you can't see. And a whole lot of it gets absorbed into the coralline algae, and of course you have fish growing in there, and of course you have coral, hopefully, growing in there. And by that point, you might be tempted to say, oh, look how well cycled and established my tank is. I don't need to do water changes anymore. I can just keep adding my two-part solution. No, you'd be wrong. You need to add some trace elements. That's when you start adding them trace elements. Maybe about first 6 months, Reef Complete's going to be just fine. 6 months in, you're starting to add coral to the tank. You need to wean it over from the Reef Complete. And actually a good idea for a cyclical pattern when you're starting to wean over from Reef Complete to the two-part solution is go from the Reef Complete during the first couple of weeks after the water change, or Reef Complete for the first month after a water change, to the two-part solution for the second month or for the second 2 weeks. You see what I'm saying? Then you're using the two-part solution to add the trace elements in addition to the calcium, magnesium, and strontium that the Reef Complete has. So in the first couple of weeks or first month, you would need less of it. And then to keep the levels balanced, and that's the key, you're not worried about what specific thing is doing what, because you can spend way too much money testing for that shit if you try to worry about it. You need to worry more about keeping that level constant, keeping all those levels constant in relation to themselves and in relation to each other. So the water change you do adds a bunch of trace elements, but you got a lot of coral now, so you want to use some Reef Complete, get that calcium, strontium, magnesium that they're consuming the fastest, and then after that switch over to fusion. But see, fusion, it's not complete trace elements. Seachem is actually lacking one product, and that is a well, it's really a part 3. You see, Reef Trace and Reef Plus were designed to work with Reef Complete and Reef Carbonate. Okay, so there's your calcium, strontium, magnesium, and carbonate. And then your trace elements without the calcium, strontium, and magnesium. Okay, but Reef Fusion has calcium and strontium, magnesium, and a little bit of iron, a little bit of potassium, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but it's only got like 8 trace elements, whereas Reef Trace has like 20 trace elements. There is no 12 trace element solution that makes up the gap between the fusion and the trace. So maybe Reef Complete and Reef Trace is better, you might think. No, it's not. You'd really have to use them all in succession to have the most ideal chemistry. But Reef Fusion actually grows less algae while providing more of the ideal trace elements for corals in specifically. But the longer you go without a water change on just reef fusion, the more you start to need reef trace. And the longer after that, you start to need reef plus because it's the one that has the even more rare trace elements. But anyways, I think I've beaten this horse pretty thoroughly to death, and I'm gonna go ahead and call it a broadcast before my battery dies on me. I think they're selling shoes on TV, so I'm gonna go ahead and put bleach back on with the quickness. I don't know, some kind of insoles. Walk fit. Okay. Anyways, that's hilarious. So I have been. Let me just show you what this looks like now, because this is all pretty much non-classified. Um, this is. This is that far down. Dum da dum da dum. That's just production. Here's the really good shit. That's what I'm going for right there. That's after salaries, commission, services, wholesale. And that wholesale is a percentage of the retail from above, so it's not double dipping there. A percentage of the production. But yeah, those are my backwards and forwards extrapolations on how much money there is to be made around here in this business. And this is everything I have right now. Scheduling. How's that for a fucking schedule? This is everything I need to buy. And this is what I'm working on now, which is the basically the price list for the initial retail resale inventory. And then I just gotta get the filter, stress guard and prime and stuff like that, stress coat, and then filters and heaters and lighting and aquariums, salt mix and sand and nets and stuff like that. Just little shit here and there. I'm not gonna have like a complete inventory all at once because I'm just gonna buy all this shit off of eBay at the beginning, and then I'm gonna have wholesalers through my Lightspeed program, and that'll all be wonderful. And then I know Max is gonna like that. The landscaping plan. And gotta finish writing up the bills there, and then I will have a little summary synopsis once I total up all that. I will double check my numbers and print it out. And then I've got a couple of different private investors to show it to right quick before going to the SBA and getting a bank referral and all that good stuff, although I actually do have a banker in mind as well. But that banker also happens to be into real estate, so I might just go and let him take a look as a private investor first. But anyways, so that is actually all. That y'all might find that interesting. And I'm sorry I haven't been making videos lately, but we still need y'all's support for those of you who can and know how to donate. We have no income right now. That's why I'm just trying to haul ass and get this done. I've rewritten a lot of it and touched up a lot of it, and well, I even renamed the Central Aquarium Gaia. How you like that shit, Max? Gulf Atlantic Interactive Educational Aquarium. It's gonna be fucking big. So basically the plan is idiot-proof profitability at about 6.5 years, between 5 and 6.5 years. But very likely I'll actually start being profitable after 3 years. I could like make a bulk loan repayment after 3 years, and then basically have about $1,100 left over. And then the following year be making about 30 grand profit after my bills are paid. You know what my favorite thing about this whole thing is? That right there. Look how cute that is. Look how good my MS Paint Live Rock came out. And on that bombshell, it's time to end. Thanks for watching, y'all. Please click the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and please, please, please share links to this video. Y'all take it easy. Don't take it all. Peace.